Well, welcome everyone to the Real World panel, and I am really honored to be joined by Lio Min, Jonny Garza Villa, and Anna Meriano. And this is really cool just that we were able to do this. So I will ask my questions, and whoever just wants to jump in, we don't have to go in any order. Um, but I will start with a question that I have a book podcast and I always ask this question. And so, uh, have you always loved books and reading?
Yes.
Great.
I mean,
I'm just trying to get like jump into the conversation. Yeah, I would like force my parents to read to me over and over and over, like after they were falling asleep. And I was like poking my mom, being like, "Wake up, read more." So yes.
Yeah, same. Huge Hank the Cowdog stan when I was like in elementary school. Like being like from like country Texas, like fully envisioned that dog being my grandparents' dog, like down our dirt road. But yeah, and just like all of those little chapter books back when we were in elementary school were just like my entire life. And I feel also like a lot of like I don't know how I became a like contemporary writer when like I loved like portal fantasies, like Narnia and like the Magic Tree House, and also just like Lord of the Rings and stuff. And like somehow I'm like, nope, I'm gonna write about San Antonio, Texas, actually. So that was a fun turn. But yeah, just I fully loved reading.
yeah. I loved reading a lot when I was a kid, and I had the same experience of like being really, really deeply into fantasy. Like I read like 20 of the Redwall books. And then just a lot of stuff like Lloyd Alexander and like I like Garth Nix and all of these people. But there was actually a period of time where I guess it was like I stopped like doing things for fun for a long time, so I didn't actually pick up reading again. Like I didn't read through most of my actual like young adulthood. So there's like some like full circleness in coming back into the world and then being an author in that world now. But yeah, the only time I actually got detention was because I was like reading in class. That was like the kind of kid that I was in middle school.
I went to middle school not knowing that you weren't allowed to read in class.
Yeah.
Because like in my elementary school, it was just like understood that like, just let Anna read, and then she won't bother anyone. So I went to middle school and like got the same thing, got in trouble, and like I looked at the teacher so offended. I was like, I'm reading.
Yeah.
That can't be bad. And she was like, no, it's the Spanish class. You can't be reading in English.
Yeah.
Well, I love that, it stuck with you, and whether it was, like Leo said, a full circle moment, but here you are now writing. And since, you all write contemporary and whether it's young adult but can you remember the first contemporary young adult novel that you read that had BIPOC or LGBTQIA plus representation, or both?
This was such a hard question. 'Cause I was trying to think of like which one had both and was like also contemporary. And I think I landed on This Is Kind of an Epic Love Story by Case and Calendar, which I did not read until like 2018, very late 2018. I think it might have been the last book I read that entire year, or the first book I read 2019, somewhere around there. So like fully very late into life did I see a book that kind of like had that cross marginalization or cross identities that also like took place in like whatever year we're in now. Yeah, I think just realizing that I was like, wow, that's so wild. But yeah, for sure, Case and Calendar. This is kind of an epic love story, which I love. Really helped me like writing my first book and like having those vibes and seeing like two BIPOC queer people like falling in love. Like I was like, that I want that. That's what I'm trying to write. And so, huge inspiration for me personally.
Yeah, I'm like racking my brain. And so like my personal headcanon for like all of like the Garth Nix of Horson books, like the Necromancer books, was that like Sabriel and Lyriel were all like Asian. It was like something about like the illustration. I was just like, oh, like maybe they're half, like whatever. But then it was I'm actually like flipping through like the catalog of my brain, and I don't know if I have like a moment when it happened. Because it was like I was ambiently aware of, yeah, like I was aware of like books, but I wasn't really reading them. And it would always just kind of be like, oh, like I was a very precocious reader, like, oh, I'm going to read like adult books and stuff like that. And then it was like, I just like missed out in that period where the thing that I was going through in my life was being reflected back in the stuff that I was actually consuming. And it's like, there's no real way to make up for that after the fact. But then, yeah, as like Jonny was saying, it's like like when I did dip back into that world, it was like, oh, like I can definitely feel how it's changed, like just based very superficially on like the cover art of books. Like it looks totally different than how I remember it in my imagination or my memory. Yeah.
Yeah, I was like racking my brains, also talking with Jonny beforehand, and I was genuinely going to say that Jonny's book, 1500 Miles from the Sun, might have been my first one. And, again, like thinking of lots of fantasy books, thinking of like, or fantasy books either that were headcanon or actually on the page, queer people of color. But I did actually read kind of an epic love story, so that may have been it. And I just feel like there's so many books that fit one of those categories, but not all of those categories. So I'm like, oh yeah, this one, no, that one is, author color, characters of color, but I don't remember queer representation, or vice versa. Like maybe a side character in a David Levithan novel, but like it wasn't the like representation. Or it was fantasy, or it was, something like Bless Me Ultima, and it was very like literary adult. So yeah, Jonny, Kaysen, maybe Anna Marie Macklemore, maybe, depending on when I read all those books in about 2018.
Well, it's
I missed
so
Melinda
wonderful.
Lowe. I know Melinda Lowe was there, but I missed. Sorry.
No. It's totally fine. Yeah, I love her books. And it's so wonderful that you all are now able to bring those stories from your heart out into the book world and share those stories, because I can say this for myself. I appreciate them so much, and I know so many other readers do too. When you started writing and you knew you sort of wanted to write a book or start your writing journey, was contemporary YA or just contemporary writing the first that sort of came to mind that you wanted to write?
No.
It was going to be fantasy. Like it was like if I was ever going to write a novel, which I think was the bigger hurdle, where I was like, oh, like I've never written like fiction. It's not something I'm like interested in writing. Ha ha ha. And then I was like possessed by the spirit of this book. But like I always thought that it was going to be fantasy or like sci-fi or something like that. And it's not as though like the contemporary world didn't interest me, but it was kind of like, oh, like the thing that I did when I was a kid was I would like make up these like fantastic worlds and just like carry these characters out on this journey, and then it would be kind of a situation where I didn't know necessarily when to stop, and I didn't know how to actually arc this stuff. So I just thought like I couldn't actually do that. It was like something that I would do for fun. But then like the thing with Beating Heart Baby is that my joke is that it's actually a fantasy story that happens to be set in the contemporary world, because a lot of it feels very like but like my biggest artistic inspiration by far is anime, which even in contemporary or like realistic anime, it's like all impossible in fantasy. So that was like the way that I guess I bridged that gap. But it's like, yeah, it was not on the radar at all. Yeah.
Yeah, I also didn't like necessarily know that was going to be it for me. When I was as a reader, I had like a very, very, very long fantasy like phase, like years and years. And then when I was about 17, 18, I like found contemporary. and was like really like, oh, whoa, I love this. It's so different. It's so new. And I kind of felt like my writing followed that path a little bit too, where I was also, you know, as a kid writing mostly fantasy. A lot of my like, you know, college level creative writing classes stuff is sci-fi and fantasy. Like I started kind of playing around with like fairy tales in a contemporary setting just at the end. And then that became kind of like my two YA books are very contemporary fairy tale retellings. I don't really know how I got there other than I was suddenly like, oh, this is new and different. And also like, oh, and also I moved to New York and everyone was like, oh, you're from Houston. Have you ever seen a building? And I was like, I'm going to write about Houston so that people know.
I guess differently from them, I have yes, contemporary was always kind of like where I wanted to be. I first was like inspired to write because I really wanted to tell a story that was like Becky Albertalli's Simon Spear, but what if he was a Latino boy living in Corpus Christi, Texas, and like what those differences were. So I think like my vision has always been like I want to talk about the real world. I want to talk about experiences of people who look like me, live like me, love like me, identify like me, living presently here. Yeah, I think that's just always kind of been my inspiration. It's also like where I kind of just like love reading most. I fully will like choose to devour contemporary over a different genre any day of the week. Love to like all the different genres, but like that one's kind of just like where I end up usually. So yeah, I think just like there's that connection with contemporary that I just really feel compelled to write about, and I love writing about.
Well, thank you all for sharing. And yeah, it's very true. All genres, obviously, a reader can see themselves, but with contemporary, it can feel so real. I mean,
Right, yeah.
that's why this panel is called The Real World. And yeah, but I guess so, Leo and Anna, you had both said, you know, contemporary wasn't the first thing that you had thought of, and Johnny, that was different for you. But um, for all of you, what sort of drew you, whether it was one thing or a few things, what drew you to contemporary novels and writing?
I think for me specifically, like while like that was sort of the starting point, I also like reflected on the fact that a lot of media that kind of covers the Mexican American experience always has that like dusty filter on it. Like when it comes to like movies, I feel like even when it comes to like books, like it's gonna be historical fiction. Like our favorite YAs are historical fiction. I love Bless Me Ultima too, which is historical fiction. Like Mosquita y Mari, they have like a whole like CD player. Like I'm like that's not 2020 something. And so like I think just wanting to like give my community something that isn't from like the 80s or from the 90s or like had that filter of like we need to like be talking about like people from decades before, which you know vastly important, and like I love all of that media, but like I think that we also need to talk about what it is to experience life as a BIPOC, as a Latino, as a Chicana, as a Mexican today. And that really compelled me to like, yeah, let's just give presence to what's happening now.
I think, I don't know if this is what drew me because I was, like I said, like still kind of in like my like very young adult phase when I like first started doing some contemporary that would like lead me to the projects that became my books. But I feel like now at least, and with my my most recent book especially, yay, it's here, it's beautiful. One thing that like I guess keeps me going or fuels me writing contemporary is just like being alive, meeting kids. I work as a tutor, and I have done like classroom teaching in small doses since I got teaching certified, and there is just a lot of like life is getting very different, and smartphones, computers like change things, and kids have these different like things that they're dealing with and different experiences, and like I think there's really cool things you can do with adaptations. So like things like the Lizzie Bennet Diaries. I thought were like a really cool, like, oh, look, you can take stories and you can look at not just like retelling them for your, like, just to be like, look, it's the same story, but you can like think about, so what would cause these emotions now? It would be something very different. We wouldn't feel this particular way if we heard that a 16-year-old ran away to get married. That would just be like, what? But, you know, if there was a sex tape, that's like, whoa, my whole family's going to be like, yeah. So I think that is like, I don't know, interacting with the kids who are living in the contemporary world and being like, oh, you have so many things going on that are not represented, that we haven't seen in media, or that like, it's just kind of interesting to look at how these different themes play out differently now. Made sense. There we go.
Yeah, I think for me, it was like, I was very, you're like, this is not a blanket statement, but I'm going to put it out there. I was very wary of the fact that a lot of the, I guess, like Asian representation in Western media was like Asian media and not Asian American media, which is a distinction that I think matters in the sense of it's like, they are very vastly different experiences, and like the types of like, and I wasn't seeing like the part of it that was just kind of like, that was normal in a way that was like prickly and weird and thorny and like about more than just like familial legacy and the idea of like history and culture, where it's like, of course, like coming from any cultural diaspora, that is a part of your experience. That's something you grapple with, that you think about. But it's like, I don't walk through the world like I'm an Asian person. You know, like I'm not like, when I drink water, I'm like, this is not like a representation of an Asian person drinking water. You know what I'm saying? So it was the idea that like, what is it about like threading the needle of the everyday, along with, as Anna mentioned, like all of these like incredible things that I don't think are like the relationship that like the process of like publishing takes time. And so it's like at a certain point, like you are playing catch up to what is actually happening in reality. And so it's like much of my background is in internet-y things, that's very vague, but like I write a lot about like fandom and about like that space and the ways in which like Tumblr culture has like taken over the internet. So yeah, so it's like there are people who are writing about it, but the experience that I was thinking about, which is pretty, like there's a version of that is specific to like Asian American kids in America. And I was like, I don't really think I've seen that before, or like the versions of it that I've seen before, I found either either uncannily like transplanted onto it, where it was like, oh, you just kind of made this character Asian, but like I don't really think that this is like, there's a whole, anyway, this is like a whole version of like, what is it called? Like the merits of color blindness in that sense and representation. But it was like, no, I want it to be very, very specific. And I want it to be something that like, obviously not everybody is going to understand it, but the people that do understand it are going to hear that, like are going to hear that dog whistle like a chime right in their ear. Like you're going to see yourself in a way that maybe you didn't think you could be seen. Where it's like, I feel like there was this thing that was going around a while ago where it was like, oh, there are like no original experiences or whatever, where it's like everything that could possibly be felt in the world has been felt by at least one other person. So it's like the ability for contemporary to ring that bell and to ring it in a very, very, very ultra specific way while still having universal qualities about it. Yeah.
I found, sorry, I love everything that you just said. There is a line in my book where somebody genuinely, sincerely compliments someone's shoelaces. And I was like, I was struggling with that. I was struggling with the whole scene. I couldn't really get it. I wanted it to be an awkward interaction, and like I couldn't quite make it work. And so when I changed it from a random compliment to a shoelace compliment, I was then able to let that character go.
Yes.
I stole them from the bread, and then bail, and then be like, never mind, nothing. The main character, the narrator point of view character, never gets it. Like she's not that kind of kid. But I found recently somebody on Tumblr had caught it, screenshotted it, and was like, Anna Meriano, I see you.
Yeah.
And that delighted me. And then I did not give them my Tumblr. because they asked for it. And I was like, nope.
No way.
Forever.
No way.
But like, yes, the thing that you're talking about, like that, first of all, hopefully that person felt delighted. And second of all, I felt delighted that they had gotten it.
Yeah.
Well, I loved all of those answers, and Anna, your little anecdote sort of leads me right on to my next question, which is sort of about like author moments and what has been, if there is one or a couple, standout experiences or moments from your author career so far?
I mean, that was one, obviously. I feel like meeting all the people, like, there's a lot of, friends that I've made because we are writers, because we're either on something like this or back when we had real life events. Used to make friends that way. And then every once in a while I get fan mail, especially for my middle grade. The middle grade fan mail is so cute and so amazing. And then every once in a while, readers who say like, something made me feel validated. I think those are high points.
Yeah, I mean, like I'm one book in. It hasn't really been a year yet, which is also like it has not felt like it has both felt like no time at all and also like an eon, which I guess is just time in general. But I will say that the part that really chuffs me is that a huge part of the book is about music, and like every single like track or chapter of the book is aligned to a couple of songs. There are like 3 official playlists that go track by track, and so it's like obviously like I'm happy when people read the book, but the part that really is like like now you're really getting into it is when people tell me that they've been listening to the playlist, and thinking about the way that the songs reflect back the characters, because that was how I wrote. And so it's like the reason I share this information is because I want people to start thinking about the relationship between like music and writing, because that is my lifelong obsession. And so when it's like, not only did you take that leap with me to enter the story with me, but like now you are really getting into like a process that I thought I would have to only have on my own. For most of my life, I was like, how do you share something like that with other people outside of writing a craft book, in which case, like, then the people who are getting into it are people who are specifically thinking about craft in that way. But then it's like, this is like a little trapdoor into like thinking about like the ways in which like you can like the way that you have this relationship already. And so like, I want to share that with other people, which is why I did this whole shebang. And so it's like, okay, yeah, like now we're really vibing. Now we're like truly harmonizing. Yeah.
Yeah, I think like reiterating Anna of just like the community of it all, but also like getting inspired by other people's writing. I think like in that way of community also has been a really fun thing for me, of just like seeing like the friends to lovers experience in Aaron H.S. Levis's book, and seeing like the rivals to lovers story and Raquel Marie's You Don't Have a Shot, that like fully like drove me to like, okay, like this is what I want in my rivals to lovers book. And like the like how books like Adam Silvera's and like Picture Us in the Light kind of just like ripped me apart, and like I want to do that. And like the group cast, and it sounds like in Anna's It Sounds Like This was like, oh my god. And like Beating Heart Baby, I think, is maybe like one of my like favorite contemporary queer books in YA right now. Like it was, oh my god, the vibes are like, this is it for me. And so just like all the ways in which like books I read inspire me, and like are like, okay, now I need to get on Microsoft Word and like write the thing, and like be in community with these people, is just so powerful to me. But I think also just like in like outward experiences, getting to just like say the things out loud has been kind of fun for me, as someone who's just like, we're going to be upfront, because like one, I think that like especially as QTBA POC writers, we do not choose to be activists in our writing, but for some reason we are made activists in just like writing our own experiences. And so it's like, okay, you want to talk about it, let's talk about it. And like also just in the ways that like intersectionality can be great, but also like can be fully abused by publishing. Like, let's talk about it. Like, let's just get it all out in the air. And if it's got to be me, like, cool, that's fine. I can do that. But yeah, so I think just like getting to feel community from there too, of just like with other authors of like, yeah, like let's talk about that. Let's realize that like we're in this together. Has been a really powerful thing and something that like has made what can be a very lonely profession feel not so lonely.
Yeah, thank you all for sharing that. And I think, yeah, social media can, from an outsider's point of view, can sometimes seem like kind of just like a dumpster fire constantly, or but to know that like there's these little pockets or areas where it's like there's so much community, and then outside of it, that's like not seen constantly, is like there's so much community, and that's so important and also so special. But thank you all for sharing those moments and aspects of your author career, and I loved hearing all of those. Um, what would be your advice for people who want to write contemporary stories with LGBTQIA plus and or BIPOC themes?
Do it. I probably have more, but that's where I would start.
I think like I heard like Lilian Rivera give an answer to this question that was along the lines of just like write for yourself first, which I think like is the best way forward. Like when you have an opportunity to just tell a story with no expectation for an agent to read it, with no expectation for an editor to read it, like you're at your most free to do whatever the hell you want and enjoy that time, because once you start getting published, like that's going to fully go away very quickly. So just like take your time with it, enjoy it, and write the story that you want to tell. I think is just the best path forward.
Yeah, kind of in that same vein, it's like the beautiful, or like the most rewarding parts of reading are when you lose yourself into the story, where it's like you can transcend yourself, like you can maybe transcend like the experience of your reality, you can definitely transcend your body. And so there are these moments in which like when you're writing, you might feel the need to have to anchor yourself back into the world, or to take it back in a sense that like you don't give yourself like the full reign of experience that that you have, that other people have. And when you release that, when you let like when you stop thinking about it as I have to write a certain type of character, and yeah, as Jonny was saying, like you let the story and like the momentum of the thing that you are building just carry you, which is definitely a practice thing, where like a lot of people like are very very, and I'm one of those people who are like very very like, oh, like if not every sentence isn't exactly right, or if every single part isn't exactly built together, like how will I ever reach a conclusion? How will I have it make sense? And it's like that's what draft like 50 is for. But as far as like, yeah, just like you gotta see it through, and you also have to realize that like in the act of writing, you are, even if you're writing about yourself, or like even if you're writing about something that you don't think is like that fantastical or whatever, you are building a world. And so like within this space, you are your own kind of pioneering force, and to let that be freeing, and to let that be an inspiration in and of itself.
Also, I got advice whenever I was like writing my debut novel from one of my friends, and it was to the effect of like, until QTBIPOC writers get as many Cinderella retellings as straight white people get Cinderella retellings, like there's not enough. So when it comes to like tropes, when it comes to storylines, when it comes to retellings and things like that, until we get the same amount of those as the white people get, as the straight white people get, then we don't have enough yet. Like fully do your retellings, do your tropey antics. There's already not enough QTBIPOC YA literature out there, so just write whatever the hell you want.
I thought of one more, and this is, I mean, yes, 100% that. This is not one size fits all, but we're living in kind of a weird, scary time for many reasons. But I just also wanted to give the advice that if the privileges are available to you, you can have some control over, like, we talked about how publishing will try to commodify you and your identities and your characters' identities. And if you're in a place that you can do that, 100% awesome, good, go for it, and the community will be there for you. And if you're not in a place where you can do that 100%, you don't have to let them, even if there is pressure, even if your agents or your editors are asking you, even if they're putting it on the Penguin questionnaire. Not too specific. If you are a teacher in a state where things are going on in a certain way, you don't have to let that be the thing that publishing commodifies about you. Again, it's not a one-size-fits-all thing, but it is something that you can think about as well.
Thank you for sharing that. And yeah, like Johnny says, have it be tropey, make your retellings. I mean, personally, I don't think too many tropes are so bad. So you can never have too many. So what would you say literary success looks like to each of you?
I guess
Go ahead.
Johnny go. No, Johnny go. Johnny go.
Okay. I think, like, for me personally, I first try to separate literary success from, like, what does success look like under capitalism. Just because I think, like, that's not gonna happen. For 99.9% of us. So I see literary success just as, like, every time I get someone who is really exceptionally taken aback and happy to be represented by my stories, and, like, sees himself and feels at home with the stories that I tell. That's just such a driving thing for me personally, is just knowing that there are readers out there who see themselves in my characters, in the lives that they're living, in their families, in the food that they're eating. Yeah, I getting that validation from readers is for I love validation. So, like, getting that validation from readers personally is something that I really see as a success.
This might just be because I'm in such a weird spot of career right now, but I think literary success more and more for me is feeling like about the process, and enjoying, if I'm enjoying my writing, then that's literary success. Because number one, it's hard to keep that joy when you're in publishing. Publishing does a lot of work to suck the joy out of it. So, I mean, yes, 100%, just readers, and especially kid readers, every time they talk about books, or my book specifically, that's success. I have a tutor student who started with me when she was 6 years old, and she was very upfront at that age about she didn't know the word plagiarism, so she would just write a really cute story and then tell me I stole it from Wings of, I took this from Wings of Fire, and 100% unselfconscious. So one time she had written a sentence that I was like, that was precocious, that was a well constructed sentence, and she was like, it's from your book. The whole sentence, I don't know, shivers up someone's spine, or the description of a certain moment was 100% a sentence from my book, and I didn't recognize it, and I had told her that's kind of a nice sentence. But that, looking at your own work and being that's kind of a nice, yeah.
Yeah, it's at a certain point, the thing that I have been thinking about a lot, especially since entering the industry proper, is that for a lot of us, we have our ideas of what success might mean right now. But then it's the books and the stories that we carry with us through our lives, like that is an impact, that is an understanding of like memory and time that is not really like appreciated by the way that any industry works, in the sense of like, you know, like what's big, what's, you know, the thing that's blah 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 blah. And the hope that I have is that, you know, like 10, 20, whatever years from now, you know, assuming that Earth is still kicking, is that someone will think about the work that we have done and the way that we cherish the stuff that we have carried with us, and that has become like the foundational parts of our, like, of our work maybe, but our identity definitely, now, where it's like the true impact of anything is usually not felt in that moment, but it's like down the line, you know, like I just, you know, like we're just like setting up these elaborate domino fields and kind of hoping that, you know, someone, whether they trip into it with intention, whether they like are going somewhere else and they happen to, you know, like flick one and they're like, oh, like I want to see where this goes. Like we all have that, like moments like that in our own history, I guess, like our own personal histories. And so it's like, you know, on the one hand, obviously, like everybody who's reading PHP now, very cool. Like, thank you for telling me about it. And on the other hand, it's like, I am very curious and I am very hopeful about like the life that my work, that our work will have in the future, where the things that we were talking about before, where it's like, oh, like we didn't feel seen in our childhoods, like, and this has in some way or another, like shaped the way that like we have, like that was part of our drive to enter the industry, you know? But then it's like for the kids who do have this, or like they at least have the access to it in a way that is pretty unprecedented, like what will that do for their futures? Like how will they then further change and shape the world when that foundation was not something they had to build for themselves? So like thinking about it, not necessarily as like the long game or anything like that, but just like, yeah, like the way that art works is that it's not just about like, you know, like what's here right now. It's about like what will endure in the minds of all the people that you have touched because of the way that you built their world, if that makes sense. Also, my cat says hi. Yes.
Well, those were all such amazing answers. Thank you all for sharing that. And we love the cat cameo. Um, but so I know we still have some time, and this question wasn't on what was sent out, but if you know, whether it's a story you're working on next or a book you're working on next, as much as you can share, whether you'd like to share some of it or you just want to share like 3 words that best describe, you know, what you're working on, what would that be? Because I know obviously there's not always something big you can share.
Well, I have a book out next year, coming out April 9th, whatever that Tuesday is. And it is called Canto Contigo, available for pre-order now. Canto Contigo is a YA contemporary, but with like a dash of magical realism in there, in the form of like a talking calavera. It is in part a grief story dedicated to my grandfather who lived with Parkinson's for many years and was a mariachi, and also a rivals to lovers story that I describe as all about the epic highs and lows of high school mariachi. It follows the main character named Rafi, who moves schools his senior year, fully expects to be given the lead vocalist spot of his new group. What he gets instead is a current lead who is not at all excited about giving up his current position. And we also find out that these two almost hooked up about 8 months prior.
I'm so excited that I know you recently did the cover reveal.
Yeah,
that
no,
was
oh my god,
stunning. Oh my gosh.
blessed.
I have a couple of anthologies coming out, and cover reveal just happened for Relit, which is short story. I'm mixing up words in my head. short stories, like retellings of classic tales. They're sci-fi fantasy. I'm like losing words out of this description. Anyway, it's a really beautiful cover. Latinx authors. And I wrote, I think, probably my favorite short story that I've written to date, which is Pride and Prejudice in Space. And it's like a housing crisis on a spaceship because it's like a generations of like almost light speed travel. And as the kids who were on the spaceship start to grow up, there are like some debates about how they get cabins and like inheritance basically as they grow up. And some of them are like, well, I want to be an artist. And they're like, well, your dad signed up as the plumber, so if you want a room, you have to also be the plumber. And they're like, oh, so we're just going to do generational classes now? And like, so the main character is kind of a vlogger trying to raise awareness about this and trying to influence those decisions. And it was super fun to write. And it is all in vlog form, so like 100% dialogue, which is just what I want to write all the time. And so that's coming out in February of 2024, and I'm very excited about it. And then for future, novel projects, I've got, just really short because they're not sold or anything, Anti-Mermaid Mermaid book. And I'm really excited about that one. I'm working so hard on it. It's a little rough coming out. And I've got, what can I say about this one? Almost contemporary with a little bit of magic co-writing project. So, also very excited. Hopefully someday I can announce them.
Yeah, it's like right now I'm just working, just chipping away at book 2. Finally gonna write that fantasy novel. In some ways I feel like this should have been the first thing that I wrote, just given like all of my interests, but it's a version. Imagine if like if you took like Dante's Inferno, but then you infused it with like psychological horror magical girl anime, where it's about these 4 girls living in California who like one of them mysteriously disappeared a couple years before, and then the other 3 are separated at that time. And then what happens is the night before their senior year, or the night after their first day of senior year, and then the remaining 3 girls are together for the first time since this mysterious summer, and they go back to like their old, or like they're all drawn back to their old like hangout clubhouse room. And one of the things that they did together when they were kids was they played video games. And for the first, oh my god, my cat is biting my headphone cord. So for the very, like, they used to play video games all the time, and so they go back to this room, and there is a video game loaded up there. None of them know how it got there, and then they enter the game, and they realize very quickly that it was created by their 4th missing friend. And so it's a journey about like, the thing that I've thought a lot about was like the idea of like memory as a computing device, and also memory as obviously like a personal thing that we all encounter. And so it is about, in some ways, the ideas of overcoming gaps in memory, which are then gaps in understanding, and also about like processing loss and generational trauma within this very like picture perfect Chinese American community in inland California, which is very, very slowly and then very quickly revealed to not be the picturesque place that any of them ever thought it was, but they never talked about it amongst themselves. So yeah, the working title is The Love Club, LOVE, because those are the initials of the girls' first names.
Definitely got like goosebumps during that summary.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful idea that is just being a bear to write, but
I know that feeling, but
yeah. Yeah. So we're working. Yeah.
Well, those all sound so amazing, and oh my gosh, I'm so excited. And I guess I know we're about close to 10 minutes to 11. I don't know if you guys would be interested in if there's any questions like from the viewers. So Yeah, I guess if anyone who's watching has any questions, you're welcome to ask.
I hope everybody is having a very nice Saturday.
I also have a question now. Yeah. I also thought of a question as we were talking. So if we don't, I want to answer audience questions first, but if I don't know where to see them, so
I'm looking, so while we wait, if you're welcome to ask your question, yeah.
Okay, so like as vague as we need to be, but I'm just curious, is there any book that you're writing, like we were talking about like being inspired by like all these amazing people in the community. Is there any book that you're writing to spite?
Fully out of spite for American Dirt.
Yep.
Yeah.
I would say this is not necessarily just literature, but the particular phenomenon of an Asian American sidekick character that when I encounter them in any sort of media, I'm like, you're not a real person. You're still an idea. You're still an idea of a person. And I'm sorry, you know, like, but you like, and I understand, you know, especially for like acting roles, it's like some people, it's like, I understand this is what you got, right? Like it's hard out there in some ways, right? But yeah, I'm just like, yeah, like you're not real. I mean, this is something that like I'm sure we all encounter, you know, where it's like we're reading something, we're watching something, and it's like, yeah, like you're just not real. And like there's nothing that you can do about it in that moment. But then it's like when you step into the role of a creator, it's like, yeah, like that's the number one question. It's like, are you real? Am I real making this? The real world. Yeah. But like truly, that's it. Like, are you real?
Yeah.
Even in fiction.
I asked it because I was remembering something about what Jonny you were talking about, and I think also trying to remember like the earliest books I read triggered a memory of a book that I don't remember the exact, and I don't want to shade it because like I'm sure I enjoyed it fine. I was like 17 or 18, but the title was something along the lines of like being friends with boys, which annoying. But like as a 17-year-old, I was so excited. I was like, thank you. I haven't seen that. And then, like, obviously it was a romance. I didn't know that because I was not smart. Do not pick up on the cues. And I was so disappointed and I was so unhappy. So, like, I don't know. I just remembered suddenly that, like, that kind of set, I think, Lio, you were saying this too, like, there was a domino there where I think at that time I was like, someday I'm going to write a book that's actually about that. Because why would you title it that and then make it a romance? And then like the whole like premise of that book was like, it's never really that. Sorry, I'm sure it was a fine book. It just I took the wrong impression from that title. So like being able to like write this book, like throw in all the Ace Arrow feels, like have characters who were just like, hey, we're gonna just fucking hang out. It was really nice. Okay, there's some questions.
Oh, here we go.
I'm not Arrow, but it's okay. I don't know. I don't know anything.
So yeah, this is a good question. How do you deal with writer's block or a reading slump?
Audiobooks. I know that doesn't fix everything, but it fixes a lot for me because I can crochet or knit at the same time. Is for reading slumps.
For writer's block, just other forms of media I find really inspiring. Fully, I count watching Netflix as writing, especially if it just like, if shows like On My Block and One Day at a Time and Hintified did not exist, I don't think that my books would exist maybe, or would not be as good. So like being inspired by other things that aren't necessarily books, I think are vastly important. Pinterest counts as writing, Spotify counts as writing, like all of these things that just like urge you to just go back and try. I think all help me at least with writer's block. If I can find like go back to my book playlist or find a song that I think narrates well with the scene that I'm having trouble writing. If I'm just having trouble visualizing, I'm a very like visual writer and reader. So like if I have to go look up West Side San Antonio, or like the face cast references of my characters. Like I'll go do these things just to like help me get into book brain mode. Yeah, there's just, I think getting away from the Microsoft Word for a little bit is the best way to come back at it stronger.
Yeah, I will just fully log off. I will do this. I will go outside and touch grass. But I think the other thing too is like when you're working, especially on like the project or a big project, there's always the ambient sense of like I should be working on this project, but it's like you're like on some level, yes, like it's true, like the draft only gets done when the draft gets done. But on the other hand, it's like when you go back to something and start reworking it, it's like you don't want to end up like pulling all the stones from the road that you built just to like redo it again. Like there is value in really thinking about the intention of it and letting that kind of percolate in your brain, and then just doing anything else. Yeah, like I'll watch anime, which is not touching grass. I'll like hang out with like the creatures in my life. I'm like planting flowers and stuff. But the other version of that, which is still kind of writing related, is like not necessarily a free association, but like I always keep a running list of stuff in just like my notes app or like in Google Docs, where it's like throwaway things that I'm never gonna do anything with them, but in a moment where I'm not really sure what to do with the big thing, then it's like that's a chance to like look over and see like, oh yeah, like this Word document from like 5 years ago that I wrote one sentence for. Like, what was that? Can I do anything with that now? And just play and like play with writing and play in your real life, because that's how all the good stuff started out as. So
Yes, I had a line in my notes app from, I want to say 5 years ago, that was like, that's my claim to fame on this spaceship. I think I had it originally as brother designed the toilets. And I just pulled that, changed it to dad, and that's how Pride and Prejudice in Space gets started. So yes, the notes app. I also, just because we're veering towards the like go take a walk advice, I also want to put in sit down advice, because you need both, like 100%. And I'll take like 3 months off when I like finish a draft, because like you just need to. But recently I've been having the opposite, where like I just need to get myself to write. So like for me, having some kind of ritual. Right now my ritual is go to a coffee shop, but I'm trying to see if I can make some less expensive rituals. When it was the pandemic and I couldn't go to coffee shops, it was like, I think I really did have a writing candle for at least a couple months, where I was like, all right, I light the candle, I'm now writing, I have to write. So like you absolutely need both. Like sometimes you need to go and take a breath and like think about everything and let it all percolate. And sometimes you're like, okay, just because I don't want to sit down and write doesn't mean that that doing it will result in bad writing. Like if I force myself to sit down, I force myself to start moving the pencil and or keys, at least I will have something that I can edit. Yeah.
Well, thank you all for answering that question. Yeah, I know we are nearing the end, but I want to thank you all for taking the time to be a part of this panel. It was so wonderful to learn just more about your stories as a writer. And so Leo, Jonny, and Anna, thank you all so much for being here.
Thank you so much for moderating.
Oh, of course. It was such a big honor. And thank you everyone for watching, and definitely check out more of the panels today.
Thank you all.
Bye.